John Summers is the motoring historian. He was a company car thrashing technology sales rep that turned into a fairly inept sports bike rider. Hailing from California, he collects cars and bikes built with plenty of cheap and fast, and not much reliable. On his show, he gets together with various co hosts to talk about new and old cars, driving, motorbikes, motor racing, and motoring travel.
Good day, good morning, good afternoon. It is John Summers, the motoring historian. This episode ostensibly is going to tie together two different presentations that I went to, coincidentally, back to back. And I thought, just because they fell, one on a Wednesday night, the other on a Thursday, it was literally just a couple of weeks ago. And I thought it seemed worthwhile. So, it seemed natural to compare them together, especially since both of them look at the future of automobility. I mean, guys, it's over, right? Let's make no mistake. It is over. The first presentation was by McKinsey, and it was about the software-defined vehicle. Fundamentally, this is no longer the car as a thing of independence. Now it's like your phone. It's the edge of the cloud. It's a connected device. It's only now when I say it that I realise how much I absolutely just loathe the thought of that. The second presentation was one of the ones at the Nordic House, organised by the Society of Automotive Engineers, and Sven Beaker. Thank you again, Sven, for inviting me to these events. And this one was, again, one of these companies who are in the valley because there is a massive automotive presence in the valley, and they're in the valley trying to understand the zeitgeist, trying to meet people, trying to understand and be part of the buzz which is automobility in Silicon Valley. So to be clear then, these two presentations are thinking about the future of automobility in two different ways. McKinsey are thinking about the future of automobility in a sort of strategic kind of way, and in a way which is where they're trying to look further and with greater perception than other guys. So, they've rocked up, we've got the telescope, let's look through the telescope, what can we see through the telescope? It was applicable that one came first, really, and that it's McKinsey, who are this outside consultancy firm who are just getting fucking everywhere recently. And Buttigieg, the former transport secretary there, he's a McKinsey guy. My wife works for one of the Magnificent Seven corporates, and her life is full of McKinsey people and McKinsey method, and at McKinsey we do it this way kind of thing. These guys really are my students at Stanford. They aspire to be these the top consultancy firms, and in my day it was like Deloitte and Touche and Arthur Andersen. Now it's Bain and especially McKinsey. So if anyone's able to tell you what the future's going to look like, it should be these guys, right? Because these guys are making millions out of the fact that they're being hired by the car companies to tell them what the future should look like. So these guys are literally, these guys are Isaac Asimov or Arthur C. Clarke. They're actually writing the future. Because think about that, right? I used to feel like stuff was invented, but nothing's invented. It's not like, a mad scientist coming up with some magnificent invention like, I've done it, now we can travel through time. No, it's not like that at all. It's teams of software engineers, and if the widget needs to watch it, if you spend enough money, the software engineers are able to develop the product that can do that. So literally, when you are designing a mainstream product like an iPhone or a new Tesla or a new Ford Transit, you are literally designing the future, because these are going to be produced in their millions and sit around on every street corner or in everybody's pocket, or the BIOS, the unique way of starting the Model T Ford, or the Apple way of doing the phone versus the Android way of the phone. This is something which is going to be used by millions and millions of people and seep deep into the cultural zeitgeist. Look, and that's really what we're talking about here, because I've been watching a lot of Dave Freeberger road trips, guy from Hot Rod magazine, and he does these sort of road trips around Southern California on Route 66 as part of his attempt to launch his own YouTube channel, and I find these kind of road trips really enjoyable to sort of ride on along with him. And I don't know why I was talking about him. What Freeberger does is celebrate automotive culture. And what Freeberger does by visiting parts of Route 66 with their quintessential gas stations with the portico on the front of them. This is the Motte Bailey Castle of the American West, right? This is a piece of architecture which speaks so much to the formation of the nation and is just overlooked and forgotten and not really appreciated. Not in the case of the Motte Bailey Castles. There's no English heritage, no equivalent of English heritage looking after these kind of properties, and that's why I hesitate to call it work, this sort of folk archaeology that Freeberger indulges in, where you go and you look at the things and it's very nostalgia driven and it's kind of a historical. Sorry, Dave, I love the work, but you're clearly not a trade historian, are you? You're a Hollywood storyteller rather than somebody who's thought properly about history, because Dave Freeberger doesn't like the graffiti on buildings. And whilst I understand that he doesn't like the graffiti, I was looking at a piece of architecture the other day that's had graffiti on it, and I feel like you have to be able to look beyond the graffiti. You can see the graffiti for the art that it is, if it's good. Sometimes it is, usually it isn't. There's something in that, and the idea of graffiti as an evolving art form, that's really cool, and that young people want to do it, that's really cool as well. So there is something to be said for graffiti, is what I'm saying. And while I prefer Freeberger's no graffiti on these buildings, just to see the decline, to see how it used to be, to what he likes to do is that thing that headmaster of mine in elementary school used to like to do, where he used to imagine you were in the Roman bath when you were standing in the field in the rain of Middle England on the site of the ancient Roman villa, and he would imagine that you were in the hot bath and you could feel it. Well, Freeberger likes to do the same thing. He likes to imagine the cars that stopped here, the hot rodders who stopped on the way out to El Mirage at this long forgotten rest halt. It's really a interesting Interesting how similar that kind of history and Freiburg's kind of folk history is. Although, as I say, Freiberger struggles with the notion of, in one episode I watched recently, he talks about how is it I think that graffiti's cool if it's old, but not if it's new. Failing to recognise that the paradox is you, Dave. The paradox is you yourself, your attitude to it. You just happen to like some things and not others. That's what's at work here. It's interesting how being a historian gives you greater insight just because you've thought about things in a different way. So look, Dave celebrates the past and I try and celebrate the past, but recently I've talked a lot about the future, and I've talked in recent pods an awful lot about new cars, even though they do the job well, but I don't really give a shit about them. This is quite an important presentation though, and quite an important topic, because of this combining of the McKinsey vision with this very, very narrow vision of this one single software house presenting their suite of products to an audience of Silicon Valley people whom they are looking to get into bed with. Let's not beat around the bush. You know, that's why the CEO was there doing the presentation. These guys were called ACAS. Any presentation you go to at the moment will talk about the volume of data which is being generated by modern cars, you know, contemporary cars, let alone the kind of systems that are coming in future. And nobody's looking after this data properly. Fundamentally, nobody knows what to do with it. These guys are offering half a dozen opportunities and fundamental, you know, some kind of tools, in some cases full products, but in some cases just some tools around how you can take advantage of all of this data. So in other words, McKinsey gave you the big picture, and then this software house showed you the sort of sinews of what the financial and technological infrastructure of these new software-defined vehicles, data-defined vehicles, but software-defined vehicles was the language that McKinsey used, so that's how we'll call it. They called it the SDV. It took me a while to figure out that acronym. It's funny when you figured it out, it's obvious, but it took me a while to get to it. So this is the software-defined car. And the software-defined car versus data management and packaging in the second presentation. You know, to read from the notes that I made before I started the presentation, the bottom line here is that cars, part of a connected system in future. They are, as I said, I think at the top of the show, they are edge of cloud devices like your phone. So there's no independence and there's no freedom. The freedom of the open road is gone. I mean, I don't know what you need to do, like get out and buy a Chevelle now, like while you can. It's really, that's really the position that we're in. I mean, this fellow that presented at McKinsey, he was a charismatic, likeable guy, and like the Auto Live girl Hannah, he claimed to be a car guy, but you know, he told a story about fitting speakers to an E36 when he was a teenager. It was on the tip of my tongue to ask him if I still had the car, but I knew he hadn't. And this bloke came and talked to us for an hour or so about cars. He made a point of getting to know us. As I say, he was charismatic. I liked him. It was a good presentation. He talked to us about cars. When I left, I'm always the last person, one of the last people to leave. I was chatting with another person about Formula One, of all things. Really interesting conversation, interesting bloke that I met. But anyway, the presenter was still waiting for his Uber. So he talked to us about cars and personal mobility, but he himself is waiting for his Uber, and the poor bastard's been standing in the rain in his nice suit for 10 minutes waiting for the Uber to come, because guess what? These new fucking solutions don't work. They don't work. I'm not sure. I'm increasingly feeling that there was I felt that the pinnacle was the turn of the century, but I actually feel that there was an extended pinnacle into this century, which ended when, about 10 years ago, when manufacturers were forced to introduce emission standards. So when we first really tough emission standards. So when we first started getting wet belt engines and these small capacity turbo engines. The McKinsey presentation was called The Mobile Destiny of 2030, Winning the Race in the Software-Defined Era. I put SDV in quotes up above, and the blank piece of paper is like something important. So we talked about what software-defined meant, and how that's design, how that's development of the product, how that's upgrades on the fly, what they call OTA, like over-the-air upgrades. How in EVs, that's powertrain management. When we talk about software defined, we're saying that the software infrastructure of the vehicle is the bread of the pizza, right? It's the most important thing about how the product is designed. So you would say, is it like the steel of the car? Well, I don't think it's like the steel of the car, but I think it's because, everyone makes the car out of steel. But I think if we think about what has made the German product stand out up to now, that there was a sort of better engineering integrity about the way that, you don't need to be a car guy, just sit in a BMW and know it drove better than a Chevrolet. Yeah, sure, there were some Chevrolets that drove great, but by and large, BMWs drove a certain way, and you paid more to drive a BMW than you did to drive a Chevrolet. That sort of differentiation, that used to come from the powertrain and the interior, and who knows, some of it may still come from that. But in a software-defined vehicle, the vast majority of that differentiation is going to come from software-defined elements, which are going to be delivered over the airwaves to a product which has that capability built into it already. Now, you may remember the BMW heated seats debacle of a few years ago. This is where BMW was selling cars that had the heated seats in them already, but you needed to pay an upgrade online to be able to use them. Well, people were pissed off. They work at the moment, you just need to enable them. I remember having a conversation with Mark Gammy, who comes on the pod here, with his brother about it. He was absolutely incensed at the notion that you should have to pay for it. So BMW withdrew them. It's not gone anywhere. But this McKinsey fellow was basically, that is going to have to happen. People are just going to have to eat that shit sandwich, because this is how people are going to make money out of cars in future. He talked about, I'll put this in quotes, extending the life of the hardware by making the software updatable on the fly. So he almost seemed to be, I found myself thinking about, it was announced quite recently that the B-52 is going to have their life extended at least until 2050 or some kind of ridiculous date, by which time the airframes are going to be older than the people crewing. And of course, yeah, the airframes are, but the software infrastructure and the engines, those things are going to be completely state of the art. It's just the airframe, the building, if you like, the architecture's the same. And, it's interesting that planes can work like that. And it's interesting to think that cars are going to be able to work like that as well. And, we are comfortable, when you buy a car, you are comfortable with the idea that you might, chip it for a bit more power, mightn't you? And you are comfortable with the idea that you might fit aftermarket wheels, you might fit aftermarket suspension, you might do some things to personalize it. So although James Gammy was highly offended at the idea of having to pay for heated seats that were already fitted to the car, the notion of paying extra for heated seats is not what upsets him. It's just having to pay for it when you've kind of already got it. There was just that kind of hump to get over. But you see, when everyone's used to a over the airwaves update on their car, they're not going to feel like it in the same kind of Luddite way that James did. I'm sure you won't mind me saying that, Jamie. Now, something he talked about was how there's always a question about how much compute is actually needed on the edge of the cloud. In other words, what you want to do is just have like a green screen set up, but actually with cars, you have to have some processing power there on the edge because connectivity fades and there's latency and it's a high critical situation where you can't have latency in decision making in some cases. If the car's driving on the freeway and it needs to decide whether to swerve or not, there can't be needing to connect to some computer over the internet. And if there's the spinning wheel of doom, you see what I mean? The car has to have some computing power actually on board so it can make good decisions. And what the McKinsey fellow termed this as a centralized yet distributed system. So he had one slide that had 6 areas which were gonna define whether or not you were going to win or lose the race to a software-defined automobile. It's not an automobile at that point, is it? It's just not. I mean, if a Tesla, as I wrote an article many years ago where I compared old Chevelle with a Tesla and just said that, it's just less of what I understand a car to be. It's just, less. I know it's better as what we define a car to be, but it's not what I, understand a car to be. The Chevelle still fulfills that definition more than a Tesla is. Tesla's an awesome piece of technology. It's just not a car as I've understood it. That was my attitude sort of 10 plus years ago. Now I see that they redefined what the car is. Right now everyone's using them. They've just redefined what the car is. Well, these software defined vehicles of the future are going to do that more and more. The notion that the automobile is a place of personal independence and freedom, I think is going to disappear. I think it's just going to be another environment where you're connected, and it's just going to be another device like your phone. Yes, it's sick making, isn't it? It really is. You want to try and put a brave face on it, but how you can talk enthusiastically about an E36 BMW and then enthusiastically present this like computer on wheels shit. I just Anyway, the first factor in determining whether or not you're going to win the race to de-invent cars and invent these horrible mobility, mobile phone meet cars things, the first area is going to be hardware platform simplification. And that's a necessity, not a choice. Apparently, Rivians have 17 ECUs in them. I remember reading back in the days when I used to read car magazines, so at least 10 years ago, that, you know, the wiring in a BMW 7 Series, if you stretched it out and ran it all around the world, it would stretch around the world. You know, there was that much bloody wiring in them. So you need to simplify that. And the parallel was that, like your phone, now your phone does everything. You used to have mice and printers and cameras and all of that stuff, and now you don't need calculators. You don't need any of those devices. It's all like tied together on your phone, and that needs to happen in the design of automobiles and mobility devices, or it will happen. The second area is that there needs to be more collaboration and less competition. If you listen to my LIDAR presentation, the Hawkwind and LIDAR presentation I did a few months ago, one of the things that I was just gobsmacked by was that in this bleeding edge way that autonomous vehicles are perceiving the world, which is LIDAR, instead of companies pooling the research or sharing it or something like that, there's 3 competing German makers, and they all have a different protocol, and they're all competing with each other, and each Volkswagen and BMW and Mercedes, they all are desperate to preserve some kind of sense of identity and competitive advantage. You know, we're doing the work 3 times instead of just once, and that just seems really bloody absurd. It seems to be how we did things in the 20th century, not how we need to do things now. It's so much wasted labour, even if you think we need autonomous cars, for 3 people to be working on the same piece of technology, which Tesla and Musk feel is not even needed at all. It just seems seems likely to be misguided and wasteful, put it that way. The other example that I wrote down here around this more collaboration than competition area is that GPS is used for maps and safety around the world, and that's the sort of model that we need to work towards. There needs to be that kind of shared infrastructure there. Again, right, I mean, BMW might be able to navigate it, but Chrysler, Renault, like, are they going to be able to navigate this kind of world against the Chinese? I mean, in 1960, it was hard to perceive that the British motorcycle industry was going to be gone in 15 years. Gone. The Australian motor industry ended in 1 year period within the last 5 years. There was all 3 of the big 3 were making cars there 1 minute, and now nothing at all. The sun is really setting. I mean, I don't want to keep harping on the, it's over, but guys, it really bloody is. So yeah, so one, simplification of the hardware platform. So instead of what American cars were like in the 50s, a simple platform that's defined by, you know, the features that you have in it. Everyone has the same iPhone, but, you know, some of you have different apps in it, and you pay for more of the apps or for security or whatever. That's how these things are going to be differentiated. For these things to work, we need not to be doing what the Germans are doing with LIDAR. Everyone work. There needs to be sharing of the data. or at least of standards, protocols, the way that we're going to, Android and Mac have what was fundamentally a Windows infrastructure, don't they? There's that kind of basic understanding of whether we're going to drive on the left-hand side or the right-hand side of the road, or whether we're going to steer with wheels or tillers. That's the kind of thing that needs to be figured out here. I can't read what I wrote for number 3, but I didn't write any notes around it. Anyway, number 4 is cloud will be the engine powering automotive. He used this phrase hyperscalers, which I'd not used before, but was used in the second presentation as well. And by that they mean, Amazon Web Services, or basically people who give you compute power on demand. So this hyperscaling, getting that right, having the right partner with that, since it's not about the edge, it's more about the center, making sure that what you've got at the center works properly is going to be key, right? The cloud infrastructure is what's important, far more important than what the design of the devices on the edge of the infrastructure. In other words, it is important to be Verizon, or the network provider, as it is to be Samsung or Nokia, if they're still, the blokes that actually make the devices that you can see. Engineering must shift, I wrote. This is really interesting because this is a change that's reflected in my wife's place. My wife works at a, Magnificent Seven company, and it has been a shift where it used to be that product called the shots and sales sold what product built. And, I've worked at Valley companies that were like that as well, where the engineers were all the C-level people. So, they built what they wanted to build and they hired people to sell it. And then they were like, but why aren't you guys able to sell this stuff? And it's like, because you're fucking building what you want to build rather than what customers actually want to buy, right? And that's what's happened, is that sales have come along and said, no, post-pandemic, sales have come along and said, no, you need to build what we want to sell. Don't build this shit that we don't want, that our customers don't want. Sales is king, not product. The same is apparently, according to McKinsey, needs to happen in automotive. That traditionally it was the motor and chassis people who called the shots and decided how and what the car was like. But now software's king. Now the motor and chassis, they don't really matter. That's the real indictment, isn't it? The motor and chassis people don't matter. And if you think about it, all the time it was my wife's place that sales were taking over and, senior people were being fired and their jobs were sort of just being dumbed down and given to lower level people because, it's just changing. AI is being used to do some things. The organization is just, instead of doing everything to the nth degree, you're happy to do it to the less than nth degree, but for a better price with a lower caliber person. That's where we're going with this. Around the notion of people are used to the idea of buying a chip to improve their performance, or the car's performance, or some alloy wheels, but they don't want to pay for the heated seats that they perceive as already being built into the car. He said that he felt like makers needed to focus on what were the delightful experiences that you were going to deliver to your customer. So the final one was that in order to, make the shift towards software and away from traditional engineering, and if you think of it, by the way, ages ago, I think I went to a presentation the ZF, the German transmission people did, and I realised that there were two ZFs. There was the old ZF that made the gears, and then there was this new ZF that was called ZF, but it was actually the software house that they'd acquired, because EVs don't need normal gearboxes, do they? They need like programming and software. So ZF had completely changed what they needed to do and had basically turned into a software house. And there's, the guy that I was talking to, who was their head honcho in America, was the CEO of the whole software house that the software boutique software house that they bought a year or so before, in order to make this pivot from making cogs to making software. So, you really need engineering talent for this, and I underline that because this is what McKinsey was saying, is that you're just not going to make this pivot unless you get the right engineers on board, and a lot of them. So the revenue model here is business to business data sales. We talked a little bit about car advertisements and how already they'd pivoted away from talking about power and speed, and far more they were about the journey that the consumer was on. That was the quote that he put in it. And I found myself thinking of these sort of Subaru adverts do this very well. If you feel the overwhelming feeling is the sort of person who owns a Subaru, and you wanting to be that sort of person that owns the Subaru. The Subaru is just like the stage upon which the little family, dog loving, DEI family is playing out against. The example he gave was that the car will be like a TV where you buy streaming programs. I can't think of anything worse. If you're going to sell the car and then do over-the-air waves upgrades to it, in the way that you do a laptop or your phone, the device, the car, has to have processing power headroom built into it. The software also has to have this sort of headroom built into it. Without wanting to jump ahead, one of the issues that the second presentation highlighted was the way that if there's a problem with the development of a particular piece of software with a car maker at the moment, they'll go to a consultancy, and that consultancy would deliver a point solution. And then the car company will move on and design another model and maybe, hire the same consultancy to do a different or another point solution. And these point solutions, they may be written in a protocol that means that they're just not updatable. They're just cast in stone. They were a point solution that worked for that particular application, but that's all they were. There was no kind of, future proofing around them. It's not just they need extra processing power, it's also the kind of this way in which the software is going to have to be engineered to cope with the fact that the software is going to be coming out every couple of months, but the car's going to be on the road for 5-10 years. So we had a sort of slide about what was a software-defined vehicle. It's a business model. You're making money selling the data, not your car's doing better gas mileage than the other guys, or has got more horsepower, or has nicer styling. I also wrote something about customers, the way the customers are, but I can't remember what I wrote. I can't just read my own writing. And then the third sort of characteristic of a software-defined vehicle was the actual hardware itself. Stand on your own, kill from behind, no supply. You're on that lonely road. Next, he talked about security, how you have to create a sort of DMZ around systems like braking. He had this fucking amusing metaphor where we'd had like a pasta dish at the restaurant we were in where we were doing the presentation. It was over in Oakland, and it was looking out over the harbour, and it was it was at night. It's kind of picturesque there. And you got to imagine this McKinsey bloke in his nice suit describing how each different heated piece of Italian pasta or ravioli or whatever it was, how each one of those was similar to the sort of DMZs that were required on cars. So in other words, if this one on the left here is your ICE, your in-car entertainment, streaming music, all of that kind of stuff, that is something which you would allow over the air updates to take place, right? Because ultimately, if it doesn't work, it's annoying, but it's not the end of the world. Whereas the brakes, that is something which, if you were gonna do over the airwaves updates to it, you would need a system ensuring that those updates took effectively and that the system was going to work properly all of the time for obvious reasons. Just stop and think about that, right? The brakes, I mean, just in I did a pod a couple of weeks ago where I used the quote from 2001 A Space Odyssey, I'm sorry, Dave, I can't let you do that, where the computer thinks it's gonna, the humans are gonna turn it off. And it's like, the mission's too important, Dave. I can't let you turn me off. The machine's taking over. It's the classic, It's plot spoiler for 2001 A Space Odyssey there, guys, by the way. Sorry about that. If every element of the car can be updated over the airwaves, when you get in it and you start it up and you back it out the driveway in the morning and it's had a new software upgrade, it's not even the same car as it was the night before, is it? Was it Star Trek? It was like, with the quote, it's life, Jim, but not as we know it. This is quite alarming. This is why I enjoy going to these kind of presentations as well, because it makes you realise where we are, because of course there are certain areas that they don't know what's happening. I wrote down, it's not clear who owns the data. And the data, we mean the data that's being generated from all the cameras that are on cars. Think about how many more there will be on. Apparently the Waymo has 29 pairs of eyes on the road. That's what the Autoliv engineer was saying, 29 pairs of eyes. So think about all the data which is streaming off that car, and think about how powerful that is if you can big data it with all of the data for all the vehicles all around. So it's not clear who owns the data. It's not clear who should store it, who should pay for it to be stored. It's not clear how it should be stored, whether it should be nearline or that kind of method of storage which is, slower to get to. Gosh, this is reaching back into my own software sales past of whether things are online or nearline. As we used to say, tape backup. Tape backup. That's right, young'uns. Some motherfucker used to come to your premises and pick up tapes and take them off site, and that was your disaster recovery. If your factory burned down, you bought new computers, and then the dudes showed up with the tapes, and your new systems always loaded absolutely perfectly without issue. The data issue is huge, said the McKinsey guy. Then he left and had to wait 15 minutes for his Uber.
Agent Orange. Agent Orange. Silent doesn't burn.
So the second presentation was by these guys, ACAS, AICAS. Nothing to do with AI. It's just a coincidence. The CTO and founder is named James Hunt. Faintly ironic about James Hunt being involved in the de-inventing of not just driving, but the whole what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, freedom of the open road, freedom to grab a girl's ass without there being any repercussions. James Hunt, the motor racing driver, personified that, didn't he? He personified that playboy era of the 1970s, the freedom to do that kind of thing, right or wrong. You know, because my freedom is another person's oppression and all, I get it. I'm not advocating for that. I'm just saying the 1970s were a different place, and James Hunt was the personification of a way of living which is far too misogynistic to be acceptable at the moment. And it's ironic that this bloke who's invented this company with this technology that's the opposite. I made that point, didn't I? Do I need to keep hammering it? I'm not sure. So the ACAS presentation was called Is AI Ready for the Intelligent Vehicle Edge? And think about that. There's a lot going on there, isn't there? And the guy talked a little bit about the title in the presentation, and it's only now reading it back that I realise that. I'll say it again to help you ruminate it. Is AI ready for the intelligent vehicle edge? The fellow presenting was called Johannes Biermann, German president of the company based in Karlsruhe, which is a town not far from Frankfurt, where we actually have some friends who live. So that was a weird coincidence, but maybe not, because really this is the sort of automobile of Silicon Valley, Benz and Cannstatt, and the first car and all of that was not far from Karlsruhe. So were so interesting that there was that connection. So he began his presentation with a story, and I thought it was illuminating for, as usual, different reasons, for the reasons that he thought it was interesting. But I love an anecdote. He began with it, so let me do it justice. And it was that he'd driven a Cybertruck. He had friends up in Tahoe or somewhere like that, and he'd driven a Cybertruck in the time that he'd been here in California. He was surprised that the size was manageable, which of course is a tribute to how much space there is in America versus in Europe. He described his first experience using full self-driving. Says he felt safe, which is interesting because that's the experience I have watching people ride in Waymos for the first time and then be like, whoa, it's actually a really good driver. But, I know that feeling of bemusement is still that I had the first time I rode in it. That's still only about 9 months or 12 months old or something like that. So I do remember how it felt to be like, wow, it can drive. This full self-driving really works. The other thing he said, and I thought this was really interesting because this speaks to the kind of thing that my students say when you talk to them about their interest in car design and product design and marketing and why they're doing a class which is called Tales to Design Cars By. A surprising number of people will talk about wanting to create a better situation for, certainly a justification for autonomy is that people who are not able to drive are still able to lead independent, meaningful lives. And Johannes here, I think that's how you pronounce it. Apologies, sir, if I got it wrong, because your English was excellent. Obviously, my German is really not there. But look, the bottom line is that he said, I thought of my dad. I thought of him towards the end of his life. I thought how much richer those last years of his life could have been had this technology existed. I met somebody at Stanford some years ago, really impressive lady. She was interested in car design. You know, she was one of the first people that I'd had a candid conversation with at Stanford about the fact that, you know, they didn't care about Formula One, but they were really interested in car design from a completely different perspective from the angle that I had come from. She had two sets of grandparents, each of whom lived in different parts of the country, but they depended on the automobile for a sense of community, for their friends, to, you know, different lifestyles. But, you know, the point was that they were desperate not to lose their driving licenses, and if they lost their driving licenses, they felt like that was going to be the end of their lives because they couldn't get out and see people and socialize. And, you know, because the distances are huge, and, you know, all of that stuff that we already know. So in other words, probably 10 years ago now, she had that conversation with me, and I realized that autonomy was a lot bigger than me. I like to drive, you know, I like the feeling of a car in the bends. It was a lot bigger than that. It was really about improving people's quality of life. And I know I was cynical about that in the Autolive presentation, because the safety thing, that is just so, you know, sends chills down my spine. But this is different from that, because this is the technology, the autonomy, actually delivering independence. It's extending, it's making people's lives more meaningful. It's saying you don't have to sit at home, saying that you can, or you don't have to do like virtual chats with your friends. The bloody computer car can take you out to church or the bar or bowling or pickleball or, you know, whatever the devil your poison is. So I thought it was interesting, his perspective on technologies, which, although he has this, is, you know, works for a leading German technology software technology house, he felt, you know, he was like, wow, the full self-driving actually works. Like, wow, the truck's not too big. You know, he had a kind of a very European outsider kind of reaction to the Cybertruck and to full self-driving. So that was really interesting. But what that made me realize was that it's not about being forward or behind, is it? Because I remember going to England some years ago and everyone in England tapping their card and me needing to slide it or something like that and not having the tap functionality, you know, figured out. So I don't want to somehow imply that, you know, we in California are so forward with our, you know, dangerous, sharp-edged, ridiculous, huge Cybertrucks. I'm not trying to suggest that at all. I'm just saying that the comfort level with full self-driving, I found that really interesting, that even a German working in the industry didn't feel like that about it. What he said was, for a German, this is very advanced. I just put we just don't test properly. You know, we're just bloody beta testing because we are. If you look at the Tesla accidents, I don't want to fall down this rat hole, but if you look at the accidents Tesla's had, it's where the full self-driving technology has not perceived the world correctly. But John, are you seriously telling me that full self-driving, as it stands at the moment, is more dangerous than actual drivers? More drivers would have been killed than full self-driving as it stands. And that is true, isn't it? If you think about it, that the computers aren't perfect, but they're still better than most of the people, than, you know, all of the people all of the time. They're not perfect, but they're better than we humans are. And I think, you know, we need to recognize that. I feel less like Elon Musk is beta testing full self-driving software on us. I think it's less beta testing. I just think it's like software, and we know that all kinds of software is buggy, and that the method of doing patches and patches and patches and patches, it's just, you don't need to be a computer scientist to see how, you know, a bridge that you're constantly having to patch, or a ship that you're constantly having to patch holes in the side of, it just, you know what I mean? I mean, yeah. Anyway, that is a whole separate rat hole, isn't it? Let me actually talk meaningfully about ACAS. The company's 20 years old, and they're about products, not services. And they operate like a licensing kind of model. I don't know if does that mean they license their own technology or they license other people's. Sorry if that's not clear. It wasn't clear to me. Automotive and QA in other sort of similar areas. So one of the things that he highlighted was, luggage belts in airports. They have lots of customers. I mean, I took a photo of the slide, but, they're a significant player in the space. So at the moment, the kind of thing they do is over-the-air updates, OTA, as the McKinsey guy taught me the acronym. They do data and software lifecycle management. So what that means is making sure that, the stuff's backwards compatible, that, you're not, that the stuff is backwards and forwards compatible. They do cloud and edge products. This is dense, but it bears applying your mind to it because it shows how this guy thinks about his business. It's quite dramatic, really. Interoperability is an Internet of Things challenge. Is AI the silver bullet? In other words, making all of these different protocols and different software products all talk together properly is like a mind-boggling Internet of Things challenge. But AI, with its capability to do many small tasks very, very quickly and hopefully pretty faultlessly, certainly better than human beings, is this the silver bullet that's going to enable us to deliver the kind of autonomy that everyone wants? That was what we were sort of floating around the idea of. And by the kind of autonomy that everybody wants, I mean, you go to a rock show, you get plastered at the rock show, you leave the rock show, you fall into your car and you say, take me home to San Francisco, and overnight, while you sleep off the beer, the car drives you from Los Angeles to San Francisco, and you step out of the car in San Francisco, grab a cup of coffee, walk into the office, jobs are good. That is the vision. Until autonomy can be that disconnected, you're going to sleep overnight undisturbed, comfortably, and you can be drunk in the car. It is not going to require you to take over. Until that level, I don't know if they call that level, I don't know whether that's level 5 autonomy or quite what it is. That's my measure of when true autonomy comes, is when you can do that. He identified 5 ways AI can help with interoperability. Citing as examples Stellantis, Ford and Volkswagen, he said that they have multiple platforms, software platforms that they're catering to. And just to ingest the data, you need interoperability, just to take it on board without you do any kind of analysis and scrape or, try and package it up and sell it. Now, this is that thing that I talked about earlier in the presentation, where because you need the interoperability, car makers historically have asked system integrators to do piecemeal solutions. But then those piecemeal solutions aren't future-proofed. It just becomes really, really messy, and you're in that world of patches on patches. We can standardize this. We can platformatize this, he said. At the vehicle level, they can develop methods of saving only the useful data, not all the data that the vehicle produces. Think about that, right? Because what we're saying now is that Waymo Cab, according to the Autoliv engineer, 29 pairs of eyes on the road. And at the moment, the NVIDIA on board and, the Waymo data crunching back at, Google HQ there, that is what's allowing the Waymo to make good decisions. What this guy's software is going to do is empower the AI to not record certain things or to place it in those, nether regions of computers that only engineers understand, where you can extract them. Do you see what I mean? But we're fundamentally giving the AI the chance to censor itself, censor its own behavior. We need to strike a balance between edge and cloud. This is a more sophisticated way of saying what the McKinsey dude was talking about. Whilst the cloud infrastructure is the most important thing, the product on the edge needs to have some compute. And the balance between edge and cloud is that expressed in another way. And hence, again, this term of cloud hyperscalers. And it's interesting that whilst they use different terms, the software-defined vehicle, data, packaging, whilst they were approaching the same island from different angles, some of the things that they said were the same. And this cloud hyperscalers was something that I thought, in other words, we can't do the data required for AI without the cloud hyperscalers, right? Which is presumably why the street sees so much value in the Magnificent Seven, because of the level of compute that's going to be required to deliver the business solutions of the future. Johannes highlighted the pandemic as being the time where cars really became more software defined. And the way that he framed it, and this is thinking like a businessman, I talk to VPs now, not directors at the OEMs like I used to. He says that the sales cycle is extremely long and that they need to be embedded early on in the process. You have to have the rigor to make sure that you do the right thing. And I wrote down afterwards that I felt like, kind of Tesla haven't. But nonetheless, I do feel like the full self-driving is better than most of the people most of the time. Is it faultless? No. Where do we draw the line? I think we have to draw the line when the cruise drags the woman down the street underneath itself. I think at that point you have to say, Hal needs to bloody well open the portal doors. I'm sorry, Dave, I can't do that. I'm sorry, homeless, drunk woman stuck in the wheel arches, I'm going to drive along over you anyway. Clearly that can't happen. But, the fact is, a human driver, human drivers make more mistakes. Have I made that point over and over? I probably have, haven't I? And if I haven't made it over and over, I've now muffed the clarity of the point right there and then. This is the trouble with my delivery style. What I should do is say it more clearly and then edit out all the bits where I said it badly, but I'm just not like that. He made an interesting point that although Volkswagen have lots and lots of technology in-house, they still bought Rivian. Or they've invested heavily in Rivian for the data share, right? That's what he's implying, that it's a land grab. It's what's going on for engineering talent. And it's also that thing that, looking back to the 1920s, we can see very clearly that the automobile was standardizing and many small companies with different solutions were consolidating, and that would happen in the post-war period as well, into a small number of very large companies. And this is to say that, whilst they used to be like Oakland and Chevrolet, Oakland then became part of Chevrolet and, adopted the Pontiac moniker. And then what Pontiacs were was slightly more upmarket from Chevrolet, certainly not a Buick or a Cadillac. There was that differentiation had taken place. To achieve the AI and data interoperability, they create an abstraction layer to automate many smaller integrations. That thing that we talked about a moment ago, the way it does selective relevant data, the point he made is that however much processing and bandwidth you've got, it's still critical that you understand what data is important and what data isn't to avoid latency. There's a standards organization called Covisa. It's interesting, right? Because that's what SAE are. So it's interesting what engineers need as they're developing their products is to create these kind of bodies that allow them to agree that, you know, we're all going to use bolts that have the same kind of thread. We're all going to use the same programming language. We're all going to use the same fundamental architecture. In this case, what he's talking about doing is standardizing CAN data. So you know, the data that the car itself, you know, the language the car communicates with itself in, if you like, the local area network of the car, you know, the hard. To share data costs money. Different departments, so, you know, the suspension guys don't necessarily want to share their data with the navigation guys, even though it might be beneficial for both parties, because they feel like they're giving up some of their intellectual property. So there's sometimes silos within car companies. And even if, you know, they were enthusiastic to share the data, who pays for the infrastructure for the data sharing to take place? That whole stuff that I used to sell years ago, it's the storage, but it's also the safe and secure transfer and the safe and secure retrieval of the data. It's more than, you know, storage is more than just storage. I wrote in the margin that the guy looked like Harry Hill and had similar mannerisms. And I mention it because it became more off-putting as the evening went on. At first I thought I sort of recognised him, and then I realised that this was Harry Hill's serious German engineering cousin. And the more I thought of him being like Harry Hill, the more the mannerisms became, you know, it's literally, he could have been Harry Hill's sort of straight brother, really straight man brother. Now, one of the most interesting parts of the evening was when he talked about partnering with a company called NXP. And in other words, this ACAS software sits on NXP box. And actually, if you Google around, if you Google NXP, ACAS appear as a sort of, you know, partner on the NXP website. One of the guys, NXP, are also based in Karlsruhe. One of the questions from the audience was about whether or not NXP could exist without ACAS, or ACAS could exist without NXP. And what the guy was probing around was whether the OEMs actually needed the ACAS software, or if they could just get away with just using the NXP. And the answer to that was that you can just buy NXP, you don't need to have the ACAS. So the ACAS is, I wouldn't quite say a software, I wouldn't quite say a sunroof, but, you know, it's more something like all-wheel drive. It's something which you need to decide quite early in the process of developing a car, or which, you know, whether you're going to have the belt and braces or not. The data is controlled by the customer, not ACAS. I mean, I wrote at this point in my notes that I'd realised that I was comparing the two together, and I felt like both of these presentations were about making money off data, not about making money from motors, seats, bodies, nice interiors. And all of that is just not on the table anymore. Just as your computer has, you know, some importance as a device, but it's the software that the computer's running which is really the important functionality and the important thing that you're ready to either pay for or not pay for. The device itself, there's a little bit of fashion accoutrement about it, but beyond that, it's just a disposable thing that you just replace every now and again. It's certainly not something that you do any kind of maintenance on. Data is controlled by the customer, not ACAS, and I'm emphasizing that because the way that Sven framed that quite amusingly was he said, you guys do the plumbing, but you're not responsible for what gets flushed. And that is an interesting analogy because that's sort of what we're talking about with these platforms like X and, Meta or whatever, and the level of censorship or mediation or whatever you want to call it that we feel. Is it the platform's responsibility to ensure safety? That's what we're driving at here. And they're not offering a solution to who owns the data. They're not offering a solution to who stores the data. All they're offering is a way in which you can package it up and make money out of it as an OEM. They're selling a way for OEMs to make money. They're selling shovels in the gold rush of automobile makers rushing to sell data. These are the shovels. Now, his version of, the ravioli box being separate from the salad box, being separate from the, salmon pasta box, his version of that was a zoned architecture, where he actually said a zoned architecture was evolving. So, in other words, that was already taking place. There was already the salad of braking was totally separate from the in-car entertainment of the ravioli. I was amused that both presenters used the same graphic when talking about, different systems on the car, and they got some slide that had a car in profile with dots on it, and their bullet points going off from the dots. And I was amused that they used the same image. It's a recurring theme in automotive presentations that there are a couple of images which seem to get used over and over again, and it makes you realize how linear the narrative has been. If we're looking at the same photos over and over, our thinking seems to be very, very linear. And these two guys had the same image, Coincidence? Yes. But, maybe there's something more to it. So to that point that you get up in the morning, you back the car out the driveway, and you set off to work, the car you're driving is not the same car as it was the night before. It's not, right? It's not. Because the AI is what's updating over the airwaves. It's not that, not like your laptop at the moment where, it's got like a new version of the software and, then you have to reboot and then you carry on. It's not like that. It's actually going to make different decisions now than it did the night before. Better decisions now, I'm sure. I mean, driving is about control, isn't it? That is about completely yielding control and not even knowing. You could get in the car and drive it and the AI parameters could be changed completely. It could have changed into Junior Johnson mode and you'd be none the wiser. So to sum up then, ACAS had these 5 ways in which they could help. I did take a photo. I might link to it if I can, but if you're listening to this presentation, it's enough. I think, the takeaway is that structure to make money out of the data is being put in place, even as the securing and legal clarity around who actually owns the data and who has the right to do what with it, even as that remains completely opaque, the method to make money out of the data is taking shape. Thank you, Drive-Thru.
Your soul to the gods, rock and roll. Oh, black metal.
This episode has been brought to you by Grand Touring Motorsports as part of our Motoring Podcast Network. For more episodes like this, tune in each week for more exciting and educational content from organizations like the Exotic Car Marketplace, the Motoring Historian, Break Fix, and many others. If you'd like to support Grand Touring Motorsports and the Motoring Podcast Network, sign up for one of our many sponsorship tiers at www.patreon.com/GT Motorsports. Please note that the content, opinions, and materials presented and expressed in this episode are those of its creator, and this episode has been published with their consent. If you have any inquiries about this program, please contact the creators of this episode via email or social media as mentioned in the episode.